Welcome back, true believers and all you spectacular Spidey fans out there, to another very exciting Marvel Spider-Man related video, or should I more specifically say, a topic discussion pertaining to the inevitable sequel of Marvel Spider-Man, with that, of course, being Marvel Spider-Man 2. We've obviously discussed about this game in several amounts in previous videos, so I definitely recommend that you go check those out if you haven't already. We've gone about news updates from Yuri Lowenthal himself, the overall status of the game, what I personally believe the biggest strength of the game is going to be, but now we are primarily going to go over a very intriguing aspect that not a lot of people have actually focused on just yet within this game's universe, and that directly relates to what we have seen been teased twice now at the end of Spider-Man PS4, as well as Marvel Spider-Man Miles Morales, than that of the Symbiote, or the Black Suit, or the Nickelodeon Gak Black Tar, whatever you'd like to call it, that substance that we see at the end of both games on our main man, Harry Osborn. A lot of people would actually like to see instead Eddie Brock become Venom within this game's universe, as well as we don't necessarily know how just yet the symbiote is going to actually develop within this game's story, with it possibly going on to Peter Parker, turning him into Black Suit Spider-Man, or how long it's going to be on Harry Osborn even more after the events of Miles Morales. There's a lot of unanswered questions, but that is what we are going to discuss today, and I do say we because I do have a very special guest with me, one of the main co-founders and amazing individuals from the Gotham Knights group with Slick Moff and Salvage and Luke Wayne and all the others. But our main man, Irogen, is joining us today, discussing how we possibly could see the narrative inclusions be enveloped within Spider-Man's sequel with the symbiote. How are you doing today, bro?
Dude, I'm so good. Thanks so much for having me on. I know we've been talking about doing some collaborations for a while, so thank you so much. It's an honor to be on here.
And I am very honored to have you on here myself, dude. Thank you so much for joining me. So, what is currently happening with Harry Osborn in the Marvel Spider-Man universe? There's a lot of interesting stuff that we know from the prequel novel, Hostile Takeover, as well as the research stations that were scattered all throughout the first game of Spider-Man PS4, and Peter helped out Harry with all those while he was quote-unquote away in Europe. And for Miles Morales, we did get those training sessions with Hologram Peter, pretty much giving you background stories about his life as Spider-Man, and just a little tiny segment within one of those was actually analyzing Peter's first encounter with Harry Osborn, as well as the main crux of the first game, with Devil's Breath being the primary factor trying to be a cure for the Osborn disease, pretty much. Like we know, Harry Osborn's mom / Norman Osborn's wife suffered a similar type of neurological disorder that Harry is currently experiencing. And again, that was trying to be a cure for initially Harry's mom, but then Harry sadly suffered the hereditary aspects of said disease, and that's why he is now kept within that incubator tank that we have seen twice now within the endings of both games. And it was mainly supposed to be a cure / nursery element that Oscorp utilized within hospitals and save people with different ailments that were affecting them, which does draw a lot of similarities to, I would say, the first symbiote type substance that we are going to discuss is none other than that of the Ultimate iteration of the symbiote. Now, for me personally, I love the Ultimate Spider-Man video game to death, as well as the original Peter Parker Ultimate Spider-Man comics lineup, and out of all the stories that were told within the Ultimate Comics universe, by far, my favorite still to this day remains to be the narrative about the symbiote and Peter Parker's attachment to it, kind of being this more synthetic / man-made substance that was made from both Peter Parker and Eddie Brock's dads, where instead of being rivals at the Daily Bugle, they were in fact childhood friends. And that whole story panned out within the game. If you played Ultimate Spider-Man, you'll know it very well, of the symbiote going from Peter to Eddie, because the symbiote was pretty much killing Peter from the inside. What they called it in the comics, Project Venom, was supposed to be a cure for cancer, and it didn't work out too well because it wasn't finished being developed by Richard Parker and Edward Brock Sr. And seeing how it seems like Harry is going to be this universe's iteration of Venom instead of Eddie Brock is already a huge step in a completely different direction that the majority of fans are not used to. And I, for one, am actually very looking forward to see exactly how the symbiote could be incorporated into Harry's character instead of Eddie's. Currently, as it stands right now, the symbiote within Insomniac's universe does seem to be taking a lot of inspiration more so from the Ultimate Comics instead of the core 616/alien/Clintar origin that we do know of the symbiote in the mainstream Marvel Universe. So for you, Irogen, how do you view this type of iteration of the symbiote? Are you a fan of the Ultimate Comics or the Ultimate Spider-Man video game, or would you like to see this type of symbiote be involved within the core story pertaining to Peter and him gaining the black suit in this type of way, and how it could possibly be trying to be a cure for Harry and his disease?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there are benefits to both versions of the story, and I think that either direction they take will be very interesting. Like you mentioned, we've seen that this symbiote, or whatever it is, they haven't officially called it symbiote yet, but that's what we know it is. We've seen it on Harry Osborn, and I think that it's going to be really interesting to see what happens going forward. We could see a universe where Venom exists before black-suited Spider-Man. Or alternatively, maybe the symbiote will somehow be passed to Peter by Harry, and then it will either go back to Harry or end up on Eddie Brock. There's so many different directions that they could take the symbiote and the characters that it will interact with. For the story, I think that it would be really cool to play as black-suited Peter and watch him be consumed by this symbiote and decline. Maybe as a hero, I guess. I've always said it would be really cool to have a boss fight where you play as Miles versus black-suited Peter. With that said, in regards to the question itself of whether or not I think it should be more synthetic or more of an alien substance, I've personally preferred the alien substance just a little bit more. I think that it's interesting that it's alien intelligence that is corrupting these humans that it's interacting with. With that said, just the nature by which it is being used as it appears in the first game and then the Miles Morales game, it looks like it's being used as a cure for Harry. So clearly this is something that is being developed to some extent by Norman Osborn, and then we saw Kurt Connor's cameo at the end of Miles Morales as well, clearly working on this. And I guess that it would be interesting if perhaps they meshed the two, or in other words, if the symbiote itself was synthetic, but somehow the intelligence behind this thing was alien, if somehow they got a component from Jameson's son, as it happened in the Spectacular Spider-Man show and in some of the comics, perhaps hitched a ride on one of his space explorations, because as anyone who doesn't know, J. Jonah Jameson's son is an astronaut, so maybe he brings some alien life form back. But either way, I think it would be interesting if it is inherently an alien that is being experimented on and being given power by these scientists, or alternatively, if it is something synthetic that has either artificial intelligence or some kind of alien intelligence attached to it.
What's really interesting about what you just brought up is actually the fact of John Jameson's existence within this game's universe already. Of course, we already know that Peter Parker worked for J. Jonah Jameson at the Daily Bugle, and then he left to work for Otto Octavius at Octavius Industries. But at the time when he was at the Daily Bugle, again, he already interacted with Eddie Brock, but specifically with John Jameson, J. John Jameson's son. There was one of those like fake Twitter posts that we see in the game on the social media feed in the first game actually saying John Jameson, because he is going into space. And what do we see in Miles Morales in the flashback sequence with Miles and Finn going into the Oscorp Science Center is a bunch of space equipment. Now I can guarantee you all right now, when that sequence first happened in the game, I was literally poking around for as long as I could to search any possible hints towards a symbiote reference of any kind, because they kept talking about, colonization on other planets, possible life in space in general, and it was so cool. That whole sequence was just a massive mind trip, just seeing not only how detailed the museum was itself, but just the possibilities of them trying to maybe, like you said, blend the two together. Maybe it is some type of substance that is in space, and then they got it from Oscorp's, space explorations, and they brought it back to Earth, studying it to tinker around with it and maybe manufacture it in a way like what we clearly see Harry is kind of going through, this kind of deteriorating state on his health, and this substance, whatever it is, symbiote, man-made, alien, whatever, is trying to heal him. That was what Devil's Breath was trying to do in the first place, and that's why Norman tested it on the sick individual of Martin Lee, who then became Mr. Negative within Spider-Man PS4's universe. That was the whole reasoning behind his transformation, and it sadly ended up killing his parents in the process of transforming him into the much more powerful Mr. Negative. And that was the whole crux of his character and his revenge arc, trying to go after Norman in Spider-Man PS4. So there's all these layers currently within the story of the game that all relates to Norman and Oscorp. And Norman's main reasoning for it, which I think is pretty cool, that's kind of different from other interpretations of the character, is that it genuinely seems like he really, really cares about Harry and his health, because previously he always kind of threw Harry aside or focused more on Peter, or didn't really give Harry enough attention as he probably should as his own son. But in this game's world, keep in mind that Norman is not Green Goblin yet. Harry, or the character of Venom, I should say, has not been introduced within this game's universe at all, just like Otto Octavius as Dr. Octopus was not the villain throughout Spider-Man's 8-year career within the first game. He's never fought Silver Sable, he's never fought Dr. Octopus in that game's world by the time we start playing. But now, what I love about this, again, we already have a thoroughly established relationship with Harry and his friendship with Mary Jane and Peter, with the side missions, again, the prequel novel, and the slight references that we got of him in Miles Morales. So that already has an emotional attachment to Harry potentially becoming Venom instead of Eddie Brock. Now, would I love to see Eddie Brock in the sequel? Absolutely. But I think what they have going for them right now, they've already teased it twice at the end of the first game and Miles Morales, that this substance, this black suit symbiote substance, is still on Harry and Harry alone. And by the end of Miles Morales, they look like they're going to be bringing him out of the Nickelodeon gag tank, pretty much. So he's going to be free to do as he pleases. Maybe the substance has helped him in some ways that we're unaware of, or maybe it's made his situation worse. We don't know. What I really find appealing and interesting about the ultimate version of the symbiote, where it's this synthetic organic substance that was crafted with the DNA of Peter Parker's dad, is that it ended up actually causing more harm to the patient than good, because it wasn't finished being developed. And also, once Peter started wearing it, again, it kind of enhanced his overall abilities as Spider-Man. He was stronger, faster, he had organic webbing, which I'm definitely expecting them to incorporate as a gameplay mechanic in the sequel. But also, in terms of how it actually affected the host, is that whoever wore the substance in the Ultimate Comics actually turned into Venom directly. It wasn't that the symbiote was first on Peter and then it transferred onto a different host, gaining the powers of said individual and then transferring it onto a different person. It's just that the substance itself, no matter who it was on or who wore it, turned that person into Venom. Like what we saw in the Ultimate Comics is that Peter turned into Venom himself. And what I loved in the Ultimate Spider-Man game is that Peter still had remnants of the symbiote in his DNA, which then turned him into Carnage instead of Cletus Cassidy. And Carnage in that game's universe isn't even Cletus Cassidy. It was this old, organic made clone of Peter Parker's DNA and blood, which was crazy, mixed with Kurt Connor's lizard DNA, which was a crazy story in and of itself, which may happen in the sequel, given that Kurt Connors is going to have a role in it since he was teased at the end of Miles Morales. But that whole treatment of the symbiote, making whoever wears it Venom, could be very cool to see if that is applied within the sequel. Now, on the flip side, which I'll let Irogen talk about, is the alien aspect of it, where in that regard it has a lot more depth to it instead of just this substance that turns you into a monster and that's it. That's kind of what the ultimate version of the symbiote was always meant to be, but it still kept the traits of too much power kind of corrupts Spider-Man in a really intense way, and he has to learn that, of course, again, with great power comes great responsibility, but what happens when you're consumed by too much power? You then have to overcome it and let that power go, and that's what I love about this narrative with the Ultimate Comics. With the symbiote, this is where we get into the tricky matter of it, because it has a mind of its own. In that regard, it is its own character. The being of the symbiote, the alien of that creature, affecting Spider-Man and his mind and deepening this bond between him and the power that the suit provides to the host. And that could be very engaging on a narrative perspective to see how Peter might have to handle dealing with this alien that he's bonding with and maybe connecting more to, and then realizing it's slowly taking over his life in more ways than one. And how that could affect his relationships with characters like Mary Jane and Miles Morales now being his own Spider-Man, in a very, very engaging way. And again, how you might have to, separate yourself from the symbiote by the time the game is over or near the conclusion of the game's story would be very compelling as the player to go through, because of how much power the suit will most likely provide Spider-Man. He's going to be faster, stronger, probably more aggressive during combat, and all that power that you're going to utilize throughout the game will then be taken away from you. So will you even want to get rid of the symbiote by that point? Who knows? So that could be a very engaging narrative arc that Insomniac could incorporate for the symbiote if it does turn out to be its own unique being as an alien life form.
Yeah, you bring up a lot of really interesting points. everything from the symbiote attaching to different characters. If I remember correctly, there was an arc in one of the comics where Mac Gargan actually became Venom for a little bit. And it would be interesting if maybe they portray Venom here, not necessarily as Harry Osborn or Eddie Brock, but as this symbiote, as this alien or synthetic life form that can attach to different people at will. I personally am most interested, I think, to see how it will play a factor into the gameplay as Peter Parker, but even more directly the narrative and how they can sort of marry the gameplay and the narrative in this sequel, if you do in fact get to play through the game as a symbiote-suited Spider-Man. And like you mentioned, there will be a lot of interesting gameplay elements that they can add to make you really feel more powerful as Spider-Man. And I think it will be interesting just to see what they can do in regards to making it feel like it is something that you almost need, as that has always sort of been the point of the symbiote, is that it needs its host to survive, but then also Peter Parker or whoever is wearing it becomes dependent upon this symbiote. And it will be interesting to see how they can make the player feel as though they are dependent upon this substance as well. The different things that it could be an alien life form, it could be a synthetic life form. Either way, there's really unique things to do with that. I think if it's an alien life form, it comes with sort of an inherent intelligence. And that's not to say that if it has the synthetic origin that it won't have that as well. But I think that there is definitely a difference between if this is going to be something that comes in with its own thoughts and opinions about things, or if it's something that is more like a drug that has negative influences on those who utilize it. But I'm honestly most interested to see how this substance is transferred to Peter, if he has to face Venom before he even gets the black suit in the form of Harry Osborn, or if Harry is almost a misdirection, and if he will simply be a means of transporting this substance to Peter, who then transports it to somebody else. But I am really down for whatever they choose to do. If they have a very specific plot thread in mind where either Peter Parker gets the symbiote, or I don't know, if Harry Osborn is Venom throughout the second game, or if they try to switch it between different characters, it would be interesting to see almost an update to the premise of Web of Shadows, where we got to see Wolverine with the symbiote, and Electro with the symbiote, and Black Cat with the symbiote. It would be interesting if we got some of that angle in the Insomniac universe. Not, again, necessarily that that's a likely direction for them to take it, but even perhaps if Harry is Venom throughout the second game, and then we get a Miles Morales too, where Peter has become Venom because of the symbiote. I just think that there's so many interesting things they could do.
I think what the Insomniac have set up now, with 2 games under their belt, both of which are incredible, utilizing the fact that people are going to expect this aspect of the game featured some way or another in the sequel, meaning they teased it at the end of the first game, teased it at the end of Miles Morales. We already kind of got this, hint towards Harry's going to come out of the tank, so clearly that is going to be a core focus, I would assume, of the plot of the sequel. And again, like what you said in a great way, how exactly is that going to pan out is what intrigues me the most. The symbiote is on Harry. If they let him out of the tank, is it still going to be on him throughout the duration of the game? Maybe making him more healthy, or maybe making him more sick. We don't know. Or, again, by the time maybe midway through the game, it somehow transfers onto Peter when Peter finds out that Harry's, doing well, and he goes to visit him, and then it somehow transfers from Harry to Peter that way, or something happens. Maybe it transfers from Harry to Miles onto Peter. We have no clue, but whatever route they go, it's surely going to be something that I think that we've never seen before. Making the symbiote influence the host in such a crucial, dynamic way really encapsulates me as a fan and as a gamer into where the narrative can evolve further. And seeing how Oscorp seems to be the big brains behind this right now with making this substance, or at least putting the substance onto Harry with all their other projects, like, of course, the secret penthouse lab with Norman and all the spiders and all that, what's going on there. There's a lot of stuff that they can do with utilizing these characters and fleshing them out even further with connecting them to everyone else's story. And that really makes me intrigued to see where they can go next.
I was just thinking it would be interesting if they made it a mechanic where you could literally take off the symbiote at any time. Like halfway, 50% through the game when you have it on, the mission pops up for you to dispose of this thing, and it's up to you, the player, to go do it. And depending on when you go and take it off, that could influence the direction of the story. Now, again, that's not necessarily a likely direction. That doesn't really fit with Insomniac's game mode, but I think it just demonstrates the freedom and the power that they have in regards to the story that they want to tell. And like you were mentioning, just the way that it will play a part in fleshing out these characters, I think is just so vast, and there will be so much potential for that. I don't think Insomniac has quite peaked with their Spider-Man games yet. I think that as great as the first game was, they accomplished so much with that game. I think that there's still so much more that they can introduce, both from a gameplay perspective, but also from a narrative perspective. There's a lot of characters that we haven't yet seen in this universe that I'd be really interested to see. And that includes villains such as Mysterio, Sandman, of course, Venom, Green Goblin, and seeing those characters, I think, are what's really going to build a definitive Spider-Man experience that spans multiple games. And I think that having the symbiote involved is going to be a major step in the right direction to achieving that goal and creating games that are even better than what we've already seen, which is incredible because they've already made the best Spider-Man games as far as I'm concerned. But in regards to what the symbiote can do for the story, I think that it's going to help flesh out a lot of the characters. And again, from a gameplay perspective, I think that there's a lot of potential there. So, yeah.
And with all that said, everyone, that is the video that Irogen and I have for you today. Thank you all so much for watching. Feel free to like and subscribe to the channel, as well as Irogen's amazing channel if you did enjoy. We did do a collab on his channel going over past Spider-Man games and how we believe that they could be incorporated even more in the future as to where Insomniac could take their franchise down the line, learning from the past and embracing what is to come next. So with all that said, everyone, thank you all so much. Stay spectacular, Spidey fans. Leave a comment in the comment section down below. Peace out.